My name is Rachel, and I never thought I'd be sharing this story. But after what I experienced during my death, I realize I have no choice. If I keep silent, it'll haunt me more than it already does. You don't have to believe me. I wouldn't have believed myself before this happened. But once you know the truth, you can't unsee it. You can't escape it. That night was cold and wet, the kind of rain that makes the world feel blurry and unreal. I had just finished a long shift, exhausted, my body running on fumes and bad coffee. The roads shimmered under the streetlights, slick like oil. I barely remember getting into my car, barely remember starting the drive home. All I wanted was to crawl into bed and shut out the world. I should have known something was off. It's strange how in hindsight the warnings were there, the uneasy feeling in my stomach, the way the streetlights flickered, the silence on the road like the world was holding its breath. But I ignored it. I had spent my whole life ignoring signs. The impact was sudden. A flash of headlights in my periphery, the scream of metal against metal, and then my world turned upside down, literally. My car spun. A horrible crunch, shattered glass exploded around me. My body lurched forward, then snapped back like a puppet whose strings had been violently cut. For a moment I thought I was still awake, still gripping the steering wheel. But then I realized I was floating. I could see everything, my crumpled car, my limp body inside, the dark red streak smeared across my forehead. My first thought was that it didn't make sense. I was looking down at myself, but I was still me. I tried to scream, but no sound came. I reached out to touch something, anything, but my hands weren't solid. I felt weightless, like air, like thought. That's when I noticed the light. It wasn't a tunnel like they say. It was everywhere and nowhere, a brightness that didn't hurt my eyes. I felt warmth, a kind of peace I had never known in life. And for a moment I let myself believe, maybe, just maybe, I was going somewhere beautiful. Maybe I was wrong all along. Maybe there really was something good waiting on the other side. Then I felt a pull, not gentle, not warm, cold, strong. Something yanked me downward. The light above me flickered like a candle struggling against the wind. And then it was gone. I fell. It was slow at first, like sinking into deep water. The peace drained from me, replaced by something heavy and suffocating. My ears filled with whispers, low, rasping voices curling around my mind. The air grew thick, pressing against me, the heat rising. I tried to struggle, to pull away, but I was powerless. I was being dragged, and I didn't know where. The darkness swallowed me whole. Then came the screams, not distant, not faint, close, surrounding me, piercing. They weren't human screams. They were something else, something worse, something raw and endless. The ground appeared beneath me in a sudden, jarring stop. I collapsed, the heat searing my hands and knees. The air reeked sulfur, burnt flesh, decay so thick I gagged. The darkness wasn't empty. It moved, writhing with shadows that slithered and reached. I scrambled to my feet. My skin burned where it touched the ground, but I didn't care. I had to get away. But where? There was no sky, no horizon, just endless, shifting darkness. In the distance, shapes flickered, figures twisting and writhing, mouths open in silent wails. They weren't shadows, they were people. A voice boomed through the air, making my very bones vibrate. You did this. It was deep, mocking, filled with something ancient and cruel. It knew me. I turned and the darkness split apart. Something was coming. The shadows parted and I saw him. At first I didn't recognize him. His body was twisted, gaunt, his skin stretched too thin over sharp bones. His eyes, black pits, empty of light, locked onto mine with a familiarity that made my stomach drop. He wasn't just another lost soul. He knew me. And then I knew him too, David. Years ago he had been my mentor, a guide into the path I had chosen, the one I thought had given me power, control. He was the one who had taught me the rituals, the words, the invocations. He had laughed at the idea of heaven, spit on the name of God. And I had followed him willingly, eager to prove that I was above it all. But now he wasn't laughing. His lips curled into something that might have been a smile once, but it was all wrong, stretched too wide, too forced. When he spoke, his voice was raw, scraping against the air like broken glass. They lied to us, Rachel. I took a step back, my feet burning against the ground. No, this isn't real, I'm dreaming. David's head twitched, his neck cracking as if the bones inside were struggling to hold his skull in place. It's real, he rasped, more real than anything you've ever known. The air around us shuddered, the screams growing louder, closer. Shadows dragged themselves forward, their shapes shifting, clawing at the ground. I shook my head. I wasn't supposed to be here. David let out a horrible, wheezing laugh. That's what we all thought. I turned, searching for a way out, but there was none. The darkness stretched infinitely in every direction, shifting and pulsing like something alive. Faces flickered in and out of focus, contorted in silent agony. Their mouths opened and closed, but no sound came from them, only the never-ending wails that filled the air as if the place itself was screaming. David stepped closer. The heat around him warped the air. We were fools, he whispered. We thought we were in control. His voice cracked, and for a brief second I saw something else beneath the horror, regret. I shook my head. No, I didn't worship anything. I never bowed to Satan. You didn't have to, he cut in. It wasn't about worship, it was about rejection. That was enough. The ground beneath us rumbled, deep and slow, like something massive shifting just below the surface. A presence, watching, waiting. I wanted to scream, I wanted to wake up. David's eyes flicked past me and something in his expression shifted. Fear. They know you're here. The air turned thick, pressing against my chest like invisible hands. A force gripped my arms, my legs, the darkness solidified, closing around me. Something was coming. A voice deeper than David's, deeper than anything I had ever heard, rumbled through the air, slow and deliberate. She is ours. My mind splintered. The sheer weight of that voice crushed me from the inside, pressing against my skull, filling every corner of my being with unbearable dread. David's body convulsed, his limbs jerking at unnatural angles. Rachel, listen to me, he choked out, his voice barely audible over the rising wails. You have one chance. The shadows surged forward, something ripped me backward, I fell. I fell through darkness, but this time it wasn't the same. Before I had been dragged down, sinking into something suffocating and thick. Now I was being yanked backward, pulled by something unseen, something stronger than the force that had claimed me. The shadows screamed, the air around me howled with fury. Whatever had spoken before, whatever had called me theirs, did not want to let go. A force slammed into me and suddenly I wasn't falling anymore. I was standing, no, kneeling on solid ground. But it wasn't the searing, molten surface from before. The heat was gone. The sulfur, the decay, the suffocating weight of endless suffering, all of it vanished. I gasped for air, my body shaking violently. My hands were pressed against something smooth and cool. Marble. I looked up, light not blinding, not harsh, but overwhelming in its presence. It filled every space, every corner, every cell of my being. I didn't just see it, I felt it. Warmth, yes, but more than that. Love. A love so immense, so absolute that it brought tears to my eyes without me even knowing why. And then I saw her. She stood just a few feet away, gazing at me with an expression that made my chest tighten. Soft, kind eyes full of understanding. A face lined with age but radiant with something ageless, something eternal. I knew her before my mind even caught up. Grandma, my voice was barely a whisper. She smiled. Oh, my sweet girl. A sob broke from my throat. I had forgotten what her voice sounded like. It had been so many years, decades. She had been the only one who ever prayed for me, who ever tried to bring me back to faith. I had laughed at her back then, dismissed her words as the ramblings of an old woman stuck in outdated beliefs. But now she was standing before me, more real than anything I had ever known. I lunged toward her, desperate to hold her, to feel her warmth again, but the moment I moved, something stopped me. Not a barrier, not force, just a knowing. I couldn't touch her. I froze, the truth sinking into me like ice. I wasn't supposed to be here, she nodded as if she could hear my thoughts. Not yet. Tears burned my eyes. But there isn't much time. Her expression grew serious, the warmth still there but shadowed by something heavy. You were not meant to stay there, Rachel, but you were meant to see it. My breath hitched. Why? My voice was small, breaking. Why would I be shown that? Why would you let me? Because you needed to know. Her voice was gentle but firm. Hell is real, the enemy is real, and he doesn't take prisoners, Rachel, he only takes souls. A shudder ran through me. I remembered the voice that had claimed me, the endless torment, the empty, soulless eyes of David. Grandma stepped closer, and for the first time I noticed something in her hand, a book, not just any book, a Bible. I almost laughed at the irony, at how I had spent my whole life rejecting it, mocking it, refusing to believe a single word. But now, standing in this place after what I had just seen, the sight of it made my entire being tremble. She placed a hand over it. You have been given another chance, but it comes with a purpose. My throat tightened. I don't understand. You will. Her eyes softened, but there was sorrow there too. Rachel, you must warn them. The light around us flickered. I felt it instantly, the pull, the shift, my body tensed. It was happening again. No. I shook my head, panic rising in my chest. Please don't send me back. I don't want to go back. Grandma reached out, cupping my face without touching it. You must. Tears streamed down my cheeks. I don't know how, no one will believe me. She smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. They didn't believe him either. A tremor ran through the ground. The light began to recede. My breath quickened. She stepped back. Stay awake, Rachel. Do not be deceived. The world around me shattered, and I woke up. I woke with a gasp so violent it sent pain shooting through my ribs. My lungs burned as if I had been drowning, and for a moment I wasn't sure where I was. My vision swam, my ears ringing with the echoes of screams I could still hear, feel somewhere deep in my soul. Then the world snapped into focus. Hospital lights, white sheets, beeping monitors. I sucked in a breath, feeling the weight of my own body again, the dull ache of bruises and broken bones. My fingers twitched against the rough fabric of the blanket covering me, grounding me in reality. I was alive, but the relief never came. The memories rushed back all at once, the crash, the fall, the place I had been, the things I had seen. My grandmother's voice, soft but urgent, still rang in my ears. Warn them. A sob crawled up my throat, but it stuck there, trapped under the weight of everything I couldn't understand. How much time had passed? Had it all been a hallucination, the fever dream of a dying brain? No, I knew better. A hand touched mine, and I flinched so hard the monitors beeped in protest. My head snapped to the side, and I saw my mother sitting beside me, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. Rachel, she breathed, her voice cracking. She was gripping my hand like she never wanted to let go, her knuckles white. The sight of her, of someone real, should have been comforting, but it only made my panic worse. I didn't know how to explain what had happened. I didn't even know where to begin. My lips parted, but my throat was too raw, too dry. My mother hurried to grab a cup of water from the tray beside the bed, guiding the straw to my lips. I sipped, my body trembling with the effort. When I finally found my voice, it was barely above a whisper. How long? She blinked. You've been in a coma for 3 days. 3 days. I let the words settle over me, feeling them press against my ribs like a weight. 3 days wasn't long, but it felt like a lifetime. It felt like I had spent centuries in that place, like time had stretched and twisted into something beyond comprehension. I thought I lost you, my mother choked, brushing my hair back like she had when I was a child. The doctors, they said you shouldn't have survived. Your injuries were too severe. But then, she swallowed hard. Then suddenly you started breathing on your own. Your heart stabilized. It was like something pulled you back. Something did. I squeezed my eyes shut, bile rising in my throat. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to scream it. That hell was real. That I had seen it. That I had felt its fire licking at my skin, heard the desperate cries of the damned, seen what awaited those who rejected the truth. But how could I say it? How could I make her believe? A shiver ran down my spine, despite the warmth of the hospital room. I had spent my whole life running from faith, from God, from anything that told me there were consequences for the choices I made. I had laughed in the face of scripture, mocked those who warned me about the very thing I had now witnessed with my own eyes. I had been so blind. The door creaked open and a doctor stepped in, followed by a nurse. They spoke in hushed voices, checking my vitals, flashing lights into my eyes, asking me how I felt. I answered in monotone, numb, detached. How could I explain that my wounds weren't the real damage? That the scars inside me ran so much deeper than anything they could see? At some point, my mother stepped out to speak with them, leaving me alone in the sterile quiet, and that's when I noticed it. The chair beside my bed, something was resting on it, my breath caught. My heart lurched against my ribs, a book, not just any book, a Bible. I stared at it, my pulse roaring in my ears. It hadn't been there before. My mother hadn't brought one. She knew I wanted nothing to do with religion. No one in my family was particularly religious anymore. And yet there it was, the same book my grandmother had held in that place. My fingers trembled as I reached for it, the weight of it solid and firm in my hands. I hesitated before opening it, my chest tightening with something I couldn't name. I had spent my whole life rejecting this book, but now I needed to know. With a deep, shaking breath, I opened it. And the first words my eyes landed on made my blood turn to ice. And no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. 2 Corinthians 11:14. The room seemed to tilt. The air grew heavier, pressing against my chest. The light, I had seen it when I first died. I had thought it was welcoming me, drawing me into something warm and peaceful. But then it had vanished, ripped away as I was pulled into the abyss. What if, my stomach twisted. What if I had been deceived from the very beginning? A cold sweat broke over my skin, my hands tightening around the Bible as if it might anchor me to reality. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out the quiet beeping of the machines. The verse echoed in my mind, relentless and unshakable. For Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. Had I been fooled? Had the light I reached for been nothing more than a trap, a false sense of peace meant to lure me into eternal destruction? I thought of my grandmother, of the warmth in her eyes, the kindness in her voice. Was that real, or was it another deception? I squeezed my eyes shut, nausea twisting my gut. No, I had felt love there, a love so deep it had almost hurt. That wasn't something evil could imitate, was it? I didn't know anymore. A soft knock at the door jolted me, and I nearly dropped the Bible. My mother stepped back inside, followed by a man I didn't recognize. He was older, with graying hair and kind but piercing eyes. He wore a simple suit, and in his hands he held a small notepad. Rachel, my mother said gently, this is Pastor Michael. He came as soon as he heard what happened. I stiffened. I what? She hesitated, looking suddenly unsure. One of the nurses, she said that while you were unconscious you kept saying things about hell. My throat clenched. My mother looked away, swallowing. She said she's heard people cry out in pain, beg for help, but she's never heard anyone describe that place. The way you did. I gripped the sheets beneath my fingers, feeling my body tremble. The pastor stepped forward, his gaze steady but gentle. Rachel, I don't know what you saw, he said, but I believe you. I blinked, taken aback. You do, he nodded. I've spoken to people who have had near-death experiences before, but the ones who speak of hell, they always come back changed. A lump formed in my throat, changed. I didn't even know who I was anymore. I looked down at the Bible in my lap. My voice cracked. I saw things I can't explain, things I don't want to remember but can't stop seeing. He pulled up a chair, sitting across from me. Tell me. I hesitated, my heart hammering. The thought of speaking it aloud felt wrong, like it would make it more real, but hadn't that been the point? Warn them. I took a slow breath, staring at my trembling hands. I don't know where to start. Start with what you remember most, he said. What you can't forget, no matter how much you want to. I exhaled shakily. The fire, I whispered. The screams, the way it felt like I wasn't just in pain, I was pain. He nodded, listening intently. There were people there, my voice was barely audible. People I knew. I swallowed hard. One of them was someone I used to follow. The pastor's brows furrowed. Follow? I hesitated, shame burning my cheeks. I was involved in something, the occult, Satanism. I bit my lip. Not in the way people imagine, no sacrifices or anything like that, but we rejected God, we mocked him, we prided ourselves on it. My mother's face paled, but she said nothing. Pastor Michael nodded solemnly. And one of these people was there. I swallowed. Yes, I shivered. But he wasn't himself, he was empty. And he said I belonged there too. Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. Then the pastor spoke, his voice firm but calm. Rachel, I want you to understand something. What you saw was a warning, a glimpse of what so many refuse to believe is real. Tears burned at my eyes. Why me? My voice broke. I spent my whole life running from God, mocking him. Why would I get another chance? He leaned forward slightly. Because that's what grace is. A sob clawed up my throat. You weren't shown this to terrify you, he continued. You were shown it because you have a choice now. A chance that many don't get. I wiped my face, my hands unsteady. But what if it's too late? He shook his head. It's never too late. Something inside me cracked. I had spent so long believing that I was in control, that I didn't need saving. But now I had seen what awaited me. I had felt its hands clawing at me, claiming me, and I never wanted to feel it again. My fingers tightened around the Bible. My voice was barely a whisper. What do I do? The pastor smiled gently. Pray. For the first time in my life I did. I closed my eyes, my breath trembling as the words formed on my lips. It felt foreign, unnatural, like a language I had never truly spoken before. But I meant every word. I wasn't just asking, I was begging for forgiveness, for mercy, for a chance to undo everything I had done, every moment I had mocked, doubted, and turned away. The weight of my past pressed down on me like an anchor, memories flashing behind my eyes, rituals conducted in secrecy, words spoken in defiance, symbols drawn with steady hands and a proud heart. I had been so certain, so arrogant, believing I held the keys to knowledge, to power. Now all I could see was the abyss I had nearly fallen into. A tear slipped down my cheek. God, if you're there, if you're listening, I need you. My voice cracked. Please. Silence, not the empty, suffocating silence of hell. Not the void of despair. This was different, a stillness, a peace. For the first time since I woke up in this hospital bed, I felt something other than fear. I opened my eyes slowly, my hands still clenched together. My mother was crying. The pastor sat beside me, his expression calm but unreadable. Then he nodded. That's a start. Something inside me shifted. A weight lifted just slightly. But I knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. The next few days passed in a blur. Doctors came and went, checking my vitals, speaking in hushed voices about my miraculous recovery. My body healed faster than they expected, though the scars on my soul were harder to mend. I barely spoke about what I had seen, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how. The words felt too small. How could I explain the depth of that suffering? The way agony had become an identity, how torment had stretched into eternity with no escape. How could I explain the emptiness of those who had once been human, the way their eyes had been voids, their souls eroded by regret, anger, hatred? How could I make people believe me? My mother was cautious around me, as if afraid to press too hard. I could see the doubt in her eyes, the way she wanted to believe but struggled with the enormity of it all. I didn't blame her. I barely believed it myself. A week after I was discharged, I sat in my bedroom, staring at the Bible Pastor Michael had given me. It felt heavier than it should have, like the pages carried a weight I couldn't yet understand. My phone buzzed, a text. Nathan, glad you're okay. Let's meet up soon, we need to talk. My stomach twisted. Nathan had been part of it. One of the people who had stood beside me in our defiance, who had laughed at the same jokes, spoken the same blasphemies. He was still in it, and if what I saw was real, I hesitated before typing back. I'm not the same anymore, Nathan. The reply came almost instantly. Nathan, we need to talk. Something about those words unsettled me. I glanced at the Bible again. Maybe this was my first test. I stared at my phone screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Every instinct told me to ignore Nathan, to pretend like that part of my life had never existed. But I couldn't, because it did exist. And if what I had seen was real, then Nathan was walking straight toward the same fate I had barely escaped. I swallowed hard, forcing my fingers to move. Where? A few seconds passed. Then Nathan, our spot, midnight. A shiver ran down my spine. I knew exactly what he meant. An abandoned church on the edge of town, our meeting place for years. It was ironic, really. The house of God turned into a gathering place for those who rejected him. I had laughed about it once, thought it was poetic. Now I wasn't laughing. I clenched the phone in my hand, my pulse quickening. Everything in me screamed to stay away. But if there was even a chance I could warn him, if I could stop just one person from ending up in that place, I had to try. The night air was thick with the scent of damp earth as I pulled into the gravel lot beside the church ruins. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the crumbling stone. My breath fogged in the cold, my fingers clenching the Bible in my lap. I hadn't meant to bring it, but I couldn't make myself leave it behind. I stepped out of the car, my boots crunching against the gravel. The wind stirred the dead leaves, whispering through the skeletal remains of the building. Nathan was already there, standing just beyond the threshold where the great wooden doors had once been. His face was barely visible in the dim light, but his stance was tense, guarded. "You actually came," he said, his voice low. I swallowed, stepping forward. "Yeah." He studied me, eyes scanning my face as if searching for something. "You look different." Let out a humorless laugh. "I am different." He tilted his head slightly. "People don't just change, Rachel." I gripped the Bible tighter. "They do when they see what I saw." Silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken tension. Then he exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "That's what I wanted to talk about." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "I heard things from some of the others. They said when you were in the hospital you were talking about hell." My stomach clenched. "They said you saw something, that you were screaming, begging." His eyes darkened. "Said you were calling for God." A lump formed in my throat. Nathan took a step closer. "Tell me it's not true." I shook my head. "I can't." His jaw tightened. "Rachel, come on, you don't actually believe that, do you?" I exhaled shakily. "I didn't, not until I was there." He scoffed. "You were unconscious, probably hallucinating. Your brain." "No." My voice came out sharper than I intended. "Nathan, I felt it. I was there, I saw them." I saw. My breath caught. "Him." Nathan froze. For a second I thought I saw something flicker across his face, something raw, but then it was gone, replaced by a mask of cold skepticism. "I don't know what's gotten into you," he muttered. "But this isn't you." "It was me," I said. "That's the problem." He let out a bitter laugh. "So what now? You're some holy warrior? You think you're gonna save me?" "I think you're in danger." Nathan's face darkened. "No, you're in danger." I took a step back. "What?" "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice quieter now. A chill ran down my spine. "Nathan," a sound behind me, a shift in the darkness. I turned and felt the world drop out from under me. There in the shadows of the ruined church, something watched, not someone, something, and it was waiting. My breath caught in my throat. The air around me grew heavier, pressing against my chest like an invisible weight. My body screamed run, but my legs felt rooted to the ground. Nathan didn't move. He just stood there watching me, his expression unreadable. I forced my lips to move. "Nathan, what is that?" His jaw tensed. He glanced at the shadows behind me, then back at me. "You shouldn't have come here," he said again, softer this time. A wave of nausea rolled through me. The presence in the darkness didn't shift, didn't breathe, didn't blink, but I could feel it, watching, studying, waiting. Every nerve in my body screamed that this wasn't just my imagination. This wasn't a trick of the light or exhaustion playing games with my mind. I had felt this presence before. In the pit, in hell. A tremor ran through me as I clutched the Bible to my chest. The name of Jesus was on the tip of my tongue, but fear held it back, as if speaking it would rip apart the fabric of this moment, forcing whatever lurked in the shadows to reveal itself. Nathan took a step toward me. "Rachel, listen to me." His voice was calm, coaxing, like he was speaking to a frightened animal. "You're not thinking clearly. You went through something traumatic, that's all this is." I shook my head violently. "No, Rachel, I know what I saw." My voice trembled. "I know what I felt." His expression flickered just for a second, doubt, fear, then his face hardened. "I don't know what happened to you," he said, "but you need to stop talking about this. Stop thinking about this." His eyes darkened. "You don't understand what you're playing with." I took a shaky breath. "I do. That's why I'm telling you to get out." A muscle in his jaw twitched. "Rachel, no." I cut him off. My hands trembled as I forced my fingers to loosen around the Bible. I took a step back, closer to my car. Whatever we were doing before, whatever we thought was just a game, it was. My voice wavered, but I pressed on. "We were opening doors, Nathan, doors we had no business opening." His nostrils flared. "You sound just like them." A lump formed in my throat. "Who?" "The ones who left," he muttered. "The ones who saw too much." A cold shudder ran through me. "What are you talking about?" Nathan hesitated. Then for the first time he took a step back. "You should go." His voice was tight. I shook my head, my heart hammering. "Nathan, go, Rachel." The wind howled through the ruined church, and for a split second I swore I heard something beneath it. A whisper, low, ancient. My stomach twisted. I didn't argue. I turned, my hands fumbling with my car keys as I staggered back toward my vehicle. My breathing was ragged, my pulse thundering in my ears. I threw the door open, slammed it shut, and locked it. Through the windshield I saw Nathan standing in the same spot watching me. His face was unreadable. The darkness behind him shifted. I jammed the key into the ignition with shaking hands. The engine roared to life and I peeled out of the lot, my tires kicking up dust and gravel as I sped away. I didn't stop driving until I saw the lights of the city again. My hands were still trembling when I pulled into my driveway. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. I closed my eyes. Jesus. The weight lifted, not completely, but enough. I exhaled shakily, gripping the steering wheel. I had made a mistake going there. I had made a bigger mistake thinking I could save Nathan, because whatever had its claws in him, it wasn't letting go. The next few days felt like a haze, my mind heavy with images of the shadows and the whisper I had heard behind Nathan. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just stepped into something far deeper than I was ready for. I didn't know what to do with the knowledge I had. I didn't know how to explain it, how to warn others. How could I when even Nathan, who had been a part of it all, was in denial? And then there was the creeping fear that I might have been wrong, that it was all a mistake, that I was seeing things, feeling things that weren't real. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. Those eyes, those souls, I had been right. The morning after I left Nathan at the church, I couldn't bring myself to go to work. I was too shaken, too frail in my thoughts to put on any semblance of normalcy. Instead, I stayed home, packing from room to room, praying quietly. I needed answers. I needed clarity. I pulled the Bible out of the bag where I'd hidden it and began reading. The words blurred, but I focused on them. I focused hard, trying to ground myself, trying to let the peace I had felt in the hospital return. Then the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. "Hello," I answered, my voice trembling. "Rachel?" A cold voice came through the line, and my blood ran cold. I didn't need to hear more to know who it was. "Nathan," I whispered, "did you really think you could just walk away?" His voice was low, dangerous. My heart began to pound. "What are you talking about? You're in this whether you want to be or not," he hissed. "You've seen too much, you can't go back." I felt my chest tight. "Nathan, please, you don't know what you're doing. You're in danger. I'm fine." He cut me off, his voice dark and final. "And you'll be fine too if you accept it." There was a pause, a silence so thick it suffocated me. And then softly he whispered, "I saw you, Rachel. I saw what you did the moment you called for him." My heart skipped a beat. What are you talking about?" I felt it. His voice dropped lower, almost to a growl. "I felt it in me, the weakness you showed, the doubt." I swallowed hard, my fingers shaking. "I'm not weak. I'm not talking about you," he said. "I'm talking about your God. He's already lost, Rachel. He knows it. That's why he's pulling you into this, but you're not strong enough to resist. You never were." I felt a chill creep into my bones. "What do you want from me?" "You'll understand soon enough," Nathan said, and before I could say anything more, the line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand, my pulse pounding in my ears. My fingers shook as I dropped it onto the table. I had been right. Something was pulling at him, something evil. And the worst part, it was trying to pull me back in too. That night I couldn't sleep. The shadows seemed to crawl along the walls, whispering to me like the wind, like the sound I had heard before. I tossed and turned in my bed, but the darkness pressed in around me, suffocating, relentless. My mind was too noisy, too loud. I needed to get out. I threw on a jacket and grabbed the car keys, not even thinking twice about the decision. I couldn't sit here any longer. I had to go to the one place that had become my only solace. The church. The thought made my skin prickle, but I pushed it down. If I was going to make it through this, I had to go. I couldn't let whatever was pulling Nathan drag me down with him. The church was silent when I arrived, just as it had been the first time I stepped foot into it. The ruins, once filled with life and the sound of prayer, were now empty and cold. But for me, the silence felt different tonight. Heavy, expectant. I walked up the broken steps, my breath fogging in the cold air. I felt like I was walking into the mouth of something I couldn't escape. But I had to try. I pushed open the door, and the sight that greeted me was not what I expected. Nathan stood at the front of the church facing me. His back was straight, his head slightly tilted as if listening for something. "Nathan," I whispered. He turned slowly, a slight smile tugging at his lips, but it wasn't the smile I remembered. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't even human. It was something else. And the worst part, I knew deep down that this was the last time I would ever see him. His smile twisted further, more unsettling with every second that passed. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a smile that made something deep within me recoil, wanting to turn and run. But I stayed, rooted to the spot, my feet cold against the stone floor of the abandoned church. "Nathan," I whispered again, my voice barely a breath. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, his gaze lingered on me with an eerie calm, as though he were studying me, weighing my every movement. I could feel the weight of his stare, like an invisible hand gripping my chest, tightening with each passing moment. "You shouldn't have come here, Rachel," he said, his voice low, smooth, far too calm. It was like the Nathan I had known was slipping away, replaced by something far darker. "You know this, but you're here anyway. That's the thing about you, you always think you can control everything. You think you can fix it." I took a cautious step forward. "You don't understand," I said, my voice shaking. "This isn't you, this isn't who you are." He let out a soft chuckle, and I felt it like a shiver down my spine. "No, Rachel, you don't understand." His eyes flashed in the dim light, and I saw a flicker of something malevolent and ancient behind his usual facade. "I've seen the truth, the real truth." I shook my head, my heart pounding harder with each word. "The truth." "What truth, Nathan?" His expression darkened. "That the lies are over, the games are over, you can't run from it, and neither can I. We've already crossed the line, Rachel. We made our choices, and now the only thing left to do is to embrace it." I took another step back, my breath shallow, my mind racing. No, you don't have to do this, you don't have to give in." I reached out a hand, pleading. "I was there, Nathan, I saw it. I saw what happens when you give in to that darkness. It pulls you in and it doesn't let go." His lips curled into something almost resembling a grin. "I don't need saving, Rachel, I'm not weak like you." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I've already seen the end, and I know what comes next. We all have our place in this world, and I've found mine." A wave of dread washed over me as I backed away from him, feeling the chill of the church seeping into my bones. What do you mean? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. His eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time I saw a flicker of fear in them, real fear. But it wasn't for himself, it was for me. I'm trying to save you, he said, his voice quivering, almost pleading. You don't understand, you think I'm lost, but I'm not. I know what's coming, and you're not ready, none of you are. What are you talking about? My voice cracked as I whispered the question. What's coming, Nathan? He closed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to summon strength, then opened them again. There was nothing human in his gaze now, only a cold, empty void. Hell is coming, Rachel, it's already here, and no one is going to be able to stop it. I felt the world around me go still, as if the air itself was holding its breath. My heart thudded painfully in my chest, my body frozen in place as I tried to process his words. But before I could say anything else, the temperature in the room plummeted. A sudden gust of wind swept through the open church doors, causing the candles on the altar to flicker wildly. I heard the faint sound of whispers, like voices calling from a great distance, whispers that seemed to echo with an ancient, otherworldly power. Nathan's eyes widened, his face draining of color. It's too late, he whispered. They're here. I turned toward the door, my breath catching in my throat. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they seemed to swirl around me like a whirlwind. And then I saw them. Figures, dark, shadowy shapes, barely visible against the backdrop of the crumbling church. Their eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, eyes that burned with an unnatural fire, eyes that I could never forget. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. What are they? I gasped. Nathan's lips trembled as he spoke. The ones we've been calling, the ones we've been summoning. I shook my head. No, Nathan, this wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't what we agreed to. He turned to face the shadows, his eyes wide with a strange mix of fear and acceptance. It doesn't matter now, Rachel, you can't stop it, no one can. I tried to move, tried to run, but my legs felt heavy, like the very air around me had turned to lead. And then a voice, low and guttural, spoke from the darkness. You should have never come back, Rachel. The words sent a chill through my entire being. They were not spoken by Nathan. The voice was deeper, older, its power vibrating through the very walls of the church. I turned to face the source of the voice, but there was nothing. No figure, no shape, just darkness. And then the whispers intensified, becoming louder, more insistent, as though 1,000 voices were calling to me from beyond the veil. My mind screamed, urging me to run, but my body refused to move. Nathan, I whispered, my voice barely audible. What have you done? His eyes met mine, and I saw no trace of the person I once knew. Instead, there was something far darker, something that seemed to belong to the shadows. I've already made my choice, he said quietly, and now you must make yours. I didn't know what he meant, I didn't know what I was supposed to do, but I knew this, I was not going to let whatever these things were take me. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I remembered the words I had whispered in my hospital bed, the words that had pulled me back from the brink. In the name of Jesus. I whispered louder this time. A growl rumbled from the depths of the darkness, and the shadows shuddered. I didn't stop. I stepped forward, clutching the Bible to my chest, and I said the words again, stronger this time. In the name of Jesus, I command you to leave. The church shook, the air growing thick with a power I couldn't comprehend. The shadows screamed as they recoiled, shrinking away from the light, and for a brief, fleeting moment I thought I saw someone in the darkness. But then it was gone. The air cleared, the whispers faded, and the shadows vanished. But Nathan, he stood there still, silent. I ran through the darkened streets, my heart pounding, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away, had to escape whatever had just happened in that church. My mind was reeling, trying to piece together what I had witnessed, but the pieces wouldn't fit. Nothing made sense anymore. I stumbled into my apartment, the door slamming behind me as I gasped for air. My legs gave way and I collapsed onto the floor, shaking uncontrollably. The silence of the room pressed in around me, suffocating, but it was better than the chaos I had just escaped. I couldn't bring myself to look back, not even for a moment, because I knew that whatever I had encountered, it wasn't finished. The darkness wasn't done with me yet. But no matter how much I tried to shake the images from my mind, the whispers remained, always just beneath the surface, like a distant echo, a reminder of something terrible waiting in the wings. The feeling that I was being watched never left me. At night I would hear things, footsteps that weren't mine, a soft murmur in the dark. But every time I reached for the light, the sound stopped, leaving me alone with my fear. It was as if whatever I had seen in that church was still with me, following me in the shadows, patiently waiting for me to let my guard down. Days passed in a haze, my thoughts haunted by Nathan's final words. Image of him standing there, his face twisted with that dark smile, would not leave me. He had been lost, his soul consumed by whatever dark power he had joined, but the worst part was that he had been right. I was already part of it. I knew it now deep in my bones. Whatever had called Nathan, whatever had brought him to that place, was after me too. It had touched me, had pulled me to that point where the line between good and evil became blurred. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't ignore the truth. The darkness had marked me and there was no escaping it. But there was something else now, something that had come with the terror, something that had been birthed in that moment when I faced the shadows. A strength. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. It wasn't something I could explain. It wasn't like the fear that gripped me so tightly in the church. This was different. It felt like a tether, a pull towards something greater than myself, something that wasn't of this world. I didn't understand it, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't alone. Every time the shadows whispered, I felt that strength grow. Every time I thought about running away, about hiding from the truth, I felt the pull urging me to stand firm. I couldn't let Nathan's fate be mine. I couldn't let whatever dark force had ensnared him win. But I knew too that the battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. There was something greater at work, something that was playing with my life, pulling me into a war I hadn't asked for. I had crossed a line that I couldn't undo. The veil between worlds had thinned and there was no turning back. But now I had a choice: I could face it or I could run. And for the first time since I had seen those shadows in the church, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't just going to survive, I was going to fight. The strength inside me was growing, and this time I wouldn't be afraid. I wouldn't be lost, not this time. If this story resonated with you, share it with others who may need to hear it. Sometimes the truth we face isn't the truth we want, but it's the truth we need. Stay vigilant, stay faithful, and don't be afraid to face the darkness.